So it says like this: Vayiyu, page 106, beginning of Parshas Chayei Sarah, which right there off the bat should trigger a question. It's a strange thing to call the death of somebody the life of somebody. Right? I would have called this parsha the death of Sarah, because that's what it talks about. It talks about the death of Sarah. Why is it called the life of Sarah? There's the irony. There's an irony right there. So let's take a look at the pasuk. Vayu Chayei Sarah mea shana v'esrim shana v'sheva shanim shnei Chayei Sarah. So Sarah lived 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. These are the years of the life of Sarah. And obviously the question is, why does the Torah breaks it up into segments like that? And one of the ideas here is that the Gemara says that tzaddikim, even in death, are called alive, and Rishaim, even when alive, are called dead. Okay? Now, we see some very interesting things. I don't know if we'll get to all of them today, but we'll see some very interesting things here. First of all, take a look at Rashi. Take a look at the very first Rashi. Vayu Chayei Sarah mea shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim. Says Rashi, lekach nichtav shana b'chol klal v'klal. This is why it says shana in every. It says 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. Why do you have to repeat years each time? Lomar lecha, to let us know, shekol echad nidrosh lazo. Each one is to be understood on its own. Bas kuf at 100, kibas chof lechet. At 100, she was like at 20 when it comes to sin. Ma bas chof lo chata. Just as when she was 20, she had not sinned. Shareina bas onshi, because the person isn't punished until they're 20 years old. Af bas kuf below chet. At 100 years old, she was also sinless. Uvas chof kivas zayin liyofi. And at 20, she was as beautiful as she was when she was 7. Okay, now this needs a bit. This needs a bit of an explanation over here, because as beautiful as 7-year-olds are, most people are more interested in 20-year-olds than 7-year-olds. So the Torah says she was as beautiful at 20 as she was at 7. And most people would say, well, maybe the opposite way around, but that's not quite how people would measure things. So obviously the answer is that the beauty at 7 years old, there's a beauty of purity. There's a certain beauty of purity. And you could see 20-year-olds who may be physically, objectively beautiful, but they're as ugly as could possibly be. And I told you sometimes you see something that looks physically beautiful, then it opens its mouth and ruins everything. And you can't even look at it anymore. It just so becomes so unattractive because of the ugliness that's underlying it. So here, Sarah, at every level of every stage of her life, she's 100 years old. At 100 years old, she's as sin-free as she was at 20, and at 20, she's as beautiful as she was at 7. Okay, that's what the Torah tells us. Now, the question here becomes like this: why does the Torah report the death of Sarah at this point? Look at the next passage. Tama Sarah b'kiryas arba Hebron be'eretz Canaan vayovo Avram lispo l'Sarah v'livkosa. Avram comes to eulogize Sarah and to cry and to cry for her. And you'll notice that there's a small chaf in the word v'livkosa. There's a small chaf. So what's going on here? So first of all, Sarah Imenu, how did she die? How did Sarah Imenu die? So the Medrash says that it was the report that the Satan came to her to report that Yitzchak had been shechted at the Akedah, and then when Yitzchak came in, she was absolutely shocked and she died as a result of the shock, because she thought he had been shechted at the Akedah. There are different opinions what it was she was heard, that just hearing about the Akedah caused her to die. But the Medrash says that the Satan dressed himself up as, he told her that Yitzchak had died. Then he came in dressed up as Yitzchak, or Yitzchak came in, I don't remember which one it was, and the shock of seeing him alive, she died. Okay, it was connected to something having to do with the Akedah. So one of the commentaries said that part of the idea here is that you see, whenever God does something, it's always measured out to a precise degree. Why should the Akedah be the cause of her death? Of all things, why should the Akedah be the cause of her death? So one of the reasons here is that when she was informed Yitzchak would be born, what happened? She laughed cynically. So when she didn't believe at her level, she didn't believe what she should have believed. So her death came from believing what she shouldn't have believed. Right? That's how it goes. You see, no, everything what goes around comes around. You didn't believe when you should have believed at the birth. So when you were told about his death and you shouldn't have believed it, you did believe it. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu manipulates everything. You get what you deserve in life. One way or another, it's going to come around to get you. You get what you deserve in life, number one. Number two, there's another reason why the Akedah should be the cause of death. Pay attention very carefully. You see, Avram Avinu, in life, let's say you do a mitzvah. Can you ever blow it? You did a mitzvah. Is there any way for you did a mitzvah, you get rewarded for a mitzvah. Is there any way for you to lose the reward for a mitzvah? What is it? How can you lose the reward for a mitzvah? There's only one way. Remember, a mitzvah you get rewarded for. An aveira you get punished for. They do not cancel each other out. They do not cancel each other out. You did a mitzvah, you deserve a box of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to arrange for you to have a box of macadamia nuts. But you did an aveira, it's your mother-in-law who's going to come to the house to deliver them, right? So you're going to get a knock on the door, mother-in-law is here, but she's bringing them macadamia nuts, so you get the good with the bad, and then your mother, then if you did a big aveira, she says, well, I was going to stay for a week, I've decided to make it 2. Right? You did a mitzvah, she stays by your brother-in-law's house, So it depends, there's a lot, it goes back and forth to how HaKadosh Baruch Hu manipulates things, okay? Now, having said that, if you did a mitzvah, you can't lose the reward, except for one way. How could you lose the reward for a mitzvah? You could wipe out all of the merits of a mitzvah. How? Yes. If you truly regret having done the mitzvah, you wipe out the reward. So a guy did, why would you do that? A guy decided to go daven. A guy decided to go learn Torah. And then he finds out that while he was learning, there was a good football game, the best football game that anybody's ever seen. All the guys came out of the football game, the best football game we ever seen, quadruple overtime, and whatever happened, it's just unbelievable. Everybody's just raging about it. I guess, I wish I wouldn't have gone to learn. I wish I would have watched a football game. Some rabbi convinced me that learning is very fulfilling, and these guys look a whole lot happier than I do. Now I regret that I spent an hour learning with my chavros. You lose all the reward for them if you truly regret it. So there's a battle over here. The Gemara says that when Avram Avinu was on his way to the Akedah, the Satan tried to stop him. The Medrash says that the Satan created a pool of water that got up to Avram Avinu's neck, and they crossed through. He tried various ways to stop Avram Avinu from actually fulfilling the Akedah. That's what the Medrash says. All right, but he did the Akedah. How could and the Satan? Remember, the Satan is the ministering angel of Esav and future generations of Esav, and he hates the Jewish people, tries to trip up the Jewish people. How could he create a way to have, remember, the Akedah is a merit for us for all generations. Every Rosh Hashanah we read about the Akedah. Every Rosh Hashanah we say, God, please look at the Akedah, look what happened to the Akedah, and call in the Akedah is our merit and forgive us because of Avram, what he did. The Satan hates that. He wants to prosecute us. He doesn't want to help us out. How can he wipe out that eternal merit for the Jewish people? There's only one way. There's only one way he could wipe that out, which is what? It's already been done. There's only one way, which is what? If Avram would regret what he did. How could Avram regret what he did? If he comes home and he says, ooh, sorry, what happened? She heard about the Akedah. Oh, I don't believe I did that. That's his last shot at Avram Avinu. His last shot at Avram Avinu is, let's do something that could cause Avram Avinu to regret it. This is the last attempt. This is the final brick in building up the merit of the Akedah. That last brick, which if you didn't put it in, the whole house would crumble, and therefore he has to put in a brick. Yeah.
So would that be considered another test from Hashem? I mean, the Satan is an angel. He can't do anything for you.
The Satan has ways of, when you get into that entire system of how Hashem runs things, the Satan does have ways of prosecuting, of bringing about things. I can't tell you about that. I could, but you have to pay me a lot of money for that. But the Satan has ways of however it is he manipulates it. And remember, all these factors have to work together. He deserves a test. She deserves to die right now. There are all these factors. Okay. Now, I want to tell you something else, which is also. Let's just emphasize this very much. By the way, By the way, how old was Sarah before she had children? When she had Yitzchak? She was 90 years old, right? She was 90 years old. Now, what age was Yitzchak at the Akedah? 37. Okay, that means that she had Yitzchak for 37 years, right? Now, you know that the Gemara says that a person who does not have children is as if he's not alive. You've ever heard that, the Gemara? The Gemara says there are 4 types of people who it's as if they're dead. They're chadshuvim kemes. One of them is a poor person, one is a blind person, somebody who doesn't have children, and somebody who's a matzora, somebody who's a leper and he's outside the camp. Those are 4 people who are as if they're not alive. That's what the Gemara says. Okay? Now, you want to see something interesting? Look at the first 4 words of the pasuk. Vayiyu Chayei Sarah, the first 3 words. Okay? Now, let's take a good look at that word vayiyu. Vayiyu, the first vav, how much is a vav in gematria, in a system called gematria? 6. And a yud? And a hey? 5. So how much are we at right now? Blackjack. Right now we're at 21. And another yud?
31.
And a vav? 37. Vayiyu Chayei Sarah. How many years was Sarah really alive? How many years was Sarah really alive? She was alive for those 37 years, and she had a child up until that point as if Sarah wasn't alive. Right? There it is, right in the pasuk. One of those coincidences you find in the Torah, because it was written by man, right? Vayiyu Chayei Sarah. Vayiyu Chayei Sarah. At the life of Sarah, what was the real lifespan of Sarah? It was 37 years. Those were the years that she was really alive. Okay? Now, it says Vayiyu Chayei Sarah Vatamas Sarah, and it says, now let's read this pasuk again very carefully. Vayiyu Chayei Sarah Mea Shana V'Esrim Shana V'Sheva Shanim Shnei Chayei Sarah, the years of the life of Sarah. They were the years of the life of Sarah. Now, why does the Torah repeat that? Why should the Torah repeat those were the years of the life of Sarah? We know those were the years of the life that you just told us. So why did the Torah repeat those were the years of the life of Sarah? So there was a very tragic incident took place in Israel a few years ago. There was on Lag BaOmer, probably going back about 5-6 years, maybe more. On Lag BaOmer, there was a guy coming back from Tzfas, and he had picked up a husband and wife, and he was giving them a ride back to Yerushalayim. It was a guy from my neighborhood. I know the guy. He had picked up this guy. This guy. His friends were some other guys were in the other car. He picked up this couple to give them a ride back to Yerushalayim, and either he fell asleep at the wheel, or there was a blowout. It seemed he fell asleep, but he claimed it was a blowout. Most of the people said that he seemed to drift off at the wheel. Okay. So the car crashed, and unfortunately the wife, who was the mother of 13 children, was nifter. You can imagine the devastation. So he went to the house of the Shiva, and he was broken. He was absolutely broken that she died. He went to the house of the Shiva. The husband was there. The father of the woman was there as well, the grandfather. And at the house of the Shiva, he's distraught beside himself. Look what he's done. And the father said to him, the father quoted this pasuk. The father of the woman quoted this pasuk. He said, look what the Torah tells you. The Torah says, Sarah lived 127 years, Shnei Chayei Sarah. And then it emphasizes at the end of the pasuk, this was the allotted lifespan for Sarah. That means she would have died anyway. It happened to be that because of other factors, the way it was brought about was through the Akedah. If it wouldn't have been the Akedah, it would have been a heart attack. It would have been a heart attack. It would have been a stroke. There are other ways for her to die. But the Torah is emphasizing, don't think that something happened which interfered with the plan. It wasn't something that interfered with the plan. It was just something that brought about the fulfillment of the plan a certain way. But the plan was for her to die at 127 years. So the father, this woman said to the guy, obviously, there was a decree in Shemayim, there was obviously a divine decree that the daughter had to die. He said, if it wouldn't have been you, if it wouldn't have been the car accident, so it would have been some other way. So she would have had a stroke. It would have, but obviously that was God's decree. That's what the father said in order to comfort the woman. The Torah is telling you over here, Shnei Chayei Sarah, that was the allotment in life. That has to do with a very big idea when it comes to our belief in how HaKadosh Baruch Hu manipulates the world and what he does within that plan, what factors, in other words, there are certain factors that are variables, and they could change depending on what else is going around, and there are other factors which are hard and fast, and they sometimes could be changed, sometimes cannot be changed, a person's lifespan, things like that, where certain times it is adjustable, certain times it's what's called a gzeira, there's a divine decree. That's what the Torah is emphasizing over. Somebody had a question, yeah?
How does that relate to what you said before, that performing a mitzvah is rewarded and an avera is...
Good question. You could sometimes perform a mitzvah. The reward isn't necessarily the person's going to live longer than he should have. Then he'll get the reward in the world to come. The person can get the reward for the mitzvah in the world. To the contrary, most mitzvahs are rewarded in the world to come. What we get in this world is usually the benefit of a mitzvah. It's usually the what's called peiroseim ba'olam hazeh. Peiroseim ba'olam hazeh means sometimes if you do a mitzvah, you get what you think is a reward. It's not even a reward. It's not even a reward. A classic example would be a woman who types in an office. Right? She's a, what do you call it? She's a, what's it called? A secretary in an office. Okay, so she could type 80 words a minute. So the boss comes over to her one day and he says, well, instead of that keyboard, that straight keyboard, which is uncomfortable, we invested in, what's it called? The one that's ergonomic, is that what it's called? It's like a keyboard that's shaped a certain way that gives your hand more. Evelyn, we got you their name is always Evelyn, right? Evelyn, we got you an ergonomic keyboard, right? Oh, great, that is very nice. And the boss says, look, Evelyn, instead of that hardback chair you've been sitting on, now she's up to 100 words a minute. Instead of that hardback chair you're sitting on, we're going to get you a nice soft office chair. Oh, wow, that's great. Now she's up to 110 words a minute. And instead of you going down to the office, down to the cafeteria at the break, they're going to bring up danishes and coffee to your desk. Right? Boss made a calculation. That'll create more efficiency. She feels good about herself. She's up to 120 words a minute. That's great. At the end of 2 weeks, he's handing out envelopes in the office. And he's handing out paychecks. And he walks right past her. And she's like, boss, yes, Evelyn. I didn't get a paycheck. Paycheck? You got an ergonomic keyboard, you got a softback chair, and you're getting danishes at your desk. Says, one second. I am not working for danishes, and I'm not working for ergonomics. I'm working for my paycheck. So sometimes in life what happens is, because you're a good worker, conditions improve for you. You're a good worker, so conditions improve. So a guy gives people rides in his old van. Everywhere he drives, he does a chesed, he gives people rides. So next thing you know, a rich uncle deposits a big Winnebago on his lawn. He says, listen, God says, you're doing so well with a small car, I'm going to give you a bigger car. So he's got a brand new Chevy van. Right? So he drives on a Chevy van picking up people. God says, well, you're doing really good. I'm going to give you I'm going to make you head of a cab company, or whatever it is. In other words, it's not a reward. That's the benefits of what you've done. A guy gives tzedakah. So you give 10% of your tzedakah, you make $100,000 a year, you give 10%, God says, hey, I like you. I'm looking for a guy to give $10,000 at 10%. So he gives you another $100,000 the next year. And the guy says, hey, I'm in a good mood, I'm going to give 20%. The guy says, ooh, I've been looking for somebody like you for a long time. I got quite a few people need some help. I'm giving you $250,000 the next year. The guy gives away $50,000. God says, boy, you're really good. The next year gives you $500,000. The guy's $500,000, I'm going to give away $100,000. The next year God says, you're the man. Here's $1 million. The guy makes a calculation, $1 million, $200,000. That's a lot of smack. $200,000. I think we'll cut it down to $150,000. Wrong. God said, okay, next year you only get $850,000. $850,000. I had a bad year. I should have such a bad year. I had a bad year, right? So he cuts back down to 10%. God cuts it down to $400,000. You understand? That's how it works. So these are not rewards. These are not even rewards. These are just benefits. You've earned the privilege. It's not even the reward is in the world to come, an unimaginable reward. I knew a guy in the savings and loan. Remember savings and loan stuff in the 80s? They had the big savings loan in the 90s. So I had a guy here at the yeshiva who was a multimillionaire. So he had made his money during the savings and loan. And so I asked him, at a certain point, how much did you make? He said, well, I had one really good year where I had to write out a check to the United States government for 7 figures. That was 1 year. Yes, sir. It was 7 figures. That means if he had to write $1 million check in taxes, you could assume that he must have made a good $4 or $5 million that year, right? And that was only 1 year. That was his one good year, really good year. So I don't know exactly how much he made. But he told me that he called his father and he said to his father, I might have to leave the country. I don't think I could do it. He said it was so difficult for him to write out a check for over $1 million to the United States government. He said he wasn't sure. He ended up under federal investigation, like many other people with savings and loan. And then once in a while, he gets a phone call from me, and I throw my voice, and I tell him something like, "Hi, Jim Clark from the FBI." We're once in a while just to keep him honest. He's a Giants fan, so he deserves it. But at the end of the day. The reward that we get, the benefits we get, are not necessarily reward. That's not necessarily a reward. Okay, so the reward could manifest itself, the benefits could manifest itself longer. You may have earned longer life. That's what the commentaries say. Okay, now, the other ideas here is like this. Take a look at the next puzzle. So Yovo Avram, Vatama Sora Bekiras Arba Chevron Meretz Kedan, Vayovo Avram Lispod Lisora V'Livkosa. Avram comes to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her. Now I want you to look at Rashi, and there's a small chaf over here. There's a small chaf over here. We'll talk about that in a second. So take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Vayovo Avraham mi Be'er Sheva. Okay, you see where that is? It's 3 lines from the bottom. It's 3 lines from the bottom in the Rashi. First column. Vayovo Avram mi Be'er Sheva, lispod l'Sara v'livkosa. He comes to mourn for Sarah and to cry. And then Rashi says what we mentioned before, V'nisbecha misa Sarah la'akedah. It's like Rashi, Sarah's death is written next to the Akedah. L'fisha ayidei b'Sarah's ha'akedah. Because of the news of the Akedah, shenizdamen b'no l'shchita, that her son was almost shechted, porcha nishmasa mimeno v'mesa. Her soul left her. Okay, that's what Rashi says. Now there's a medrash that says, in other words, what the Torah says, Avram came to eulogize Sarah. Where did he come from? Where did Avram come from? Sarah was in Hebron. Where did Avram Avinu come from? He came from Beersheba. Says Rashi, he came from Beersheba. So the commentaries say there's a medrash. The medrash has 2 other opinions. And one of the opinions is that Sarah made that Avram Avinu came from Har HaMoriah, came from Mount Moriah, which is where the Akedah was. There's another opinion that he came from burying his father Terach. He came from the burial of Terach, because Terach had just recently died. So now you got 3 different opinions. Where did he come from? One is he came from Beersheba, one is he came from burying Terach, and one is he came from Har HaMoriah. Now how could all 3 opinions coexist? How could all 3 opinions coexist? So the answer is like this. We even have an expression in English. When somebody says something to you, and it's kind of outlandish, you say, hey, where are you coming from? Where are you coming from? Right? There's an expression that you use, where are you coming from? So Rashi says, Avram came from these places. So one of the commentaries says like this, you know what it means? Physically, he came from Beersheba. That's where it says at the end of the last parsha, Avram went to Beersheba. So physically, he came from Beersheba to Hebron in order to bury and mourn for Sarah and bury her. But when you say a eulogy, you get up to eulogize somebody, what do you say? What are you usually said at a eulogy? It's very interesting because even in the world, even in the physical world, very rarely will you hear a guy who's a partier and a chaser and everything else. You ever hear somebody get up at the eulogy and say, yeah, old Bob, boy, he could really put down a 6-pack. Nobody ever says that at a eulogy. Isn't that interesting? Hey, Bob, he drove a nice car. Right? Nobody ever says that. And that's what they live for. That's why, or that the other guy says, Bob, he could drive a nice car while drinking a 6-pack. That's the ultimate. Nobody ever says that. What did it say? Well, yeah, he was just, so kind to people. And everybody's there sitting like, oh, right. I once saw him hold the door open for a lady, something like that. They're always groping for something. Isn't it interesting that at the time of death, all of a sudden, values change? Isn't that interesting? All of a sudden, at the time of the eulogy, nobody's talking about how much money he had. They're talking about how much money he gave away. All the things he lived for suddenly go out, even in the night. I'm not talking about among Jews. I'm talking about the world at large. Nobody ever says, oh, yeah, he was really a good ball player. They always talk about, yeah, he helped, he gave away tickets to games. The kids could, so the poor kids could get it. All of a sudden, the real values come out. Somebody once said, you have to live your life with a vision of what you like them to write on your tombstone. Think about what you like to have written on your tombstone. That's how you have to live your life. Because if you don't live your life that way, it won't be written on your tombstone. They certainly won't say it about you. They said it was some rabbi came to give eulogy, and some guy died, and there was nothing good. The rabbi had to give eulogy. He said, can you tell me something about the guy? Was he generous? Nah, you kidding. Was he sweet? Not at all. Everything nasty. Nobody had a good word to say. The rabbi's got to get up. He's running out of time. He's got to give a eulogy. So he gets up and he goes, well, Marv, his brother was worse. You got to say something nice about the guy. Yeah. So they're only going to say something good about you. They're only going to say something good if you were good. Now, Avraham Avinu is going to say a eulogy over Sarah. What should he say? They actually had a guy here in Israel who was on a kibbutz, secular guy on a kibbutz. He was the baker on the kibbutz, and he had an unbelievable, some sort of apple cinnamon cake, unbelievable apple cinnamon cake. And he left in his will that they should write the recipe of the apple cinnamon cake on his tombstone. So you have people coming to visit at the grave. People come to visit the grave, pull up and say, "What's that? How much cinnamon? Oh, a pinch of a little vanilla syrup, vanilla. Just 1 second. Here, copy up." And that's a great way. That's a great thing to have written on your matzeva. But you know, they're really impressed in the heavenly court. You know, you go to that big apple cinnamon oven in the sky. You know, that's what they're really impressed. You know, you understand that that's what you have. That's what you got left to show for you. So the Avraham Avinu now has to say eulogy for Sarah. What is his eulogy? So Avraham Avinu says, where does he come from? Not physically. Physically, he came from Beersheba. But where does he come from when he's going to eulogize her? So he comes from two places. He comes from Mount Moriah, Har HaMoriah, where he did the Akedah. How do you have a son and raise a son who's willing to extend his neck out to be slaughtered without protesting? How do you have a son who says to you, "Dad, tie up my arms so that I don't move when you're shechting me and invalidate the sacrifice?" Which the Medrash says Yitzchak said. How do you raise a son like that? There's only one way. You have the mother instills the values in the children. The mother instills. Avraham Avinu is coming from Har HaMoriah. If I could do that to the son on Har HaMoriah, it's because of her. That's the great eulogy for a Sarah Imenu. If you raise the son like that, it's because you have a Sarah Imenu who is the mother. Remember we talk about getting away with the negative, getting rid of negative influences. Most men would be very wise. People, husbands come to me, fathers come to me to tell me they got problems with their kids. What should they do? My answer is twofold. Either get out of your wife's way and let her do the job properly, because you have too much involvement. And if he doesn't get the hint that way, then I say to him, you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And if you just get out of the house, go learn Daf Yomi, and let your wife take care of the kids and make the decisions out, so everything would be a lot better than you think, than when you stick your hands, your 2 cents, and then you just ruin everything. And Avraham Avinu, the first praise for Sarah is if he could raise a Yitzchak who's willing to die at Har HaMoriah, that's because of her, number one. Number two, where else does he come from? The burial of Terach. What does that mean? What does that mean, the burial of Terach? So you remember the famous medrash that Avraham Avinu broke his father's idols? Terach was an idol worshiper. And so he leaves Avraham Avinu to be in charge of the idols at the home. And then Avraham Avinu is there and he smashes all the idols and he puts a stick in the hand of the biggest idol. And Terach comes and says, "What's going on here?" He says, "Well, that big idol is having a bad day. You know, he just beat up all the other idols." So Terach says, "What are you talking about? He can't move. He's inanimate." So he says, "So why are you worshiping him?" You know, wise guy, into the furnace with you. So Terach goes and he tells Nimrod, they throw him into the furnace. And what does Avraham Avinu do? Avraham Avinu goes and he fights against that Terach and his own father and that own world that Avraham Avinu buried that world. He buried that world under his faith. Well, you know, they say behind every great man is a great woman, right? I got news for you. She's in front of him too. She's in front of him too. Avraham Avinu say, you know where he's coming from? He's coming from the burial Terach. If I was able to take on the world, it's because I had the support of a Sari Imenu who helped me in that battle. That's the eulogy for Sari Imenu, is the burial of Terach and the burial and coming from Har HaMoriah. Physically, he came from Beersheba. That's idea number one. Idea number two, it says that Vayovo Avram lispo the servaliv kosa. So it's a small chaf. You notice that there's a small letter chaf over there in the pasuk. Now that small letter chaf indicates, according to the commentaries, that Avraham Avinu cried less than normal. And one of the ideas is when an older person dies, there are less tears. You try to get yourself to cry. You know, it's not as tragic when an older person dies as chas v'shalom when a younger person dies unexpectedly. Now, the truth of the matter is that in life, we always look at it that way. Nobody's as sad when an older person dies when a younger person dies. And the truth of the matter is it should be the opposite. Because when a younger person dies under tragic circumstances, a person can always tell himself, well, it'll never happen to me. But when an older person dies, nobody can say it'll never happen to me. Because there's still a 100% mortality rate among mankind. You know, all studies have shown there is nobody alive today who was around at the time of the Civil War. right? There is a 100%. So that really should strike us wrong. But human nature is that we cry less. And therefore, there's a small chuf over here because she was an older woman and he cried less. However, there are two other ideas here. Idea number one is that Avram Avinu limited how much he cried. Of course he was distraught. This is his life companion. He's married to her for 90 years, over 100 years he's married to her. And this is his life companion who went with him through thick and thin, and everything they went through. And Avram Avinu limits himself on his crying. You know why? Sometimes the more you cry, the more you express yourself externally, the more it arouses internal feelings. And Avram Avinu is very concerned about exactly what we started out originally. He doesn't want to get to the point where he'll actually sense a regret for the Akedah. So he purposely limits his external crying to not arouse something on the inside, to tap into something on the inside, which could then cause him to end up regretting the Akedah. And therefore, Avram Avinu limits. It's a small chaf, v'liv kosa. There's a small chaf that he puts a lid on how much he cries. Now, I want to go back to one point I was looking for. I finally found in the Rashi. Take a look at the third, again in the first column of Rashi, going back to the first pasuk. There's a critical point. I was trying to find it. I couldn't find it before. You see where Rashi says Shnei Chayei Sarah? It's the end of the third line from the top. Shnei Chayei Sarah. Back in the first pasuk, and I'm reading right. Everybody see where I am? Where it says Shnei Chayei Sarah. Anybody? Okay. So Rashi says Kulan Shavin Latova. All of her years were equal for good. Okay? What does that mean? They were all equal for good. Rashi already told us that she was sinless and she was right. So what does it mean they were equal for good? What does that mean? Anybody got an idea? What does that mean? What does that mean? Kulan Shavin Latova. Anybody got an idea? They were all equal in goodness. What does that mean? Anybody got a shot? They were all equal in goodness.
Who is they? Who is they?
The years of her life were all equal in goodness. Kulat Shnei Chayei Sarah, the years of life of Sarah, Kulan, all the years were equal in goodness. What goodness? What are you talking about? Kulan Shavin Latova. What are you talking about? So when a commentary says like this, it's always easy to be good when you're in a good mood. I'd say more children in the world get spanked on days that daddy got a pay cut than when daddy gets a pay raise. On the day that daddy gets a pay raise, he walks into the house and his wife says, do you know that Shimmy glued Shifra to the wall today with crazy glue? And on the day of a pay raise, the father goes, that's my boy, and that's why, on the day of a pay cut, the father, there's a lot of swinging, right? Because we are, when you feel, I had a friend at camp, I remember he was also a bigger guy, and one night he couldn't sleep. He said, if I can't sleep, nobody sleeps. Right? Which is how it is when wives are expecting as well, by the way. Well, she's up, she can't sleep, and therefore you can't sleep. So when you're in a good mood, it's easy to be nice. When you're in a good mood, it's easy to be nice. When circumstances are tough, it's not so easy to be, some people wear it on their sleeve, as they say. Sorry, Mena did not have an easy life. 90 years of childlessness. She's taken by Paro. She's taken by Avimelech. There was no party. She's taken by Paro. She's taken by Avimelech. She's got a Yishmael to deal with. She's got to hug her, and then she has to see her. Kulan Shavin Litova. Her goodness is the wife of Avram Avinu, the Balas Chesed, who opened up her home, who opened up her tent, and opened up her heart to all these people. Kulan Shavin Litova. Didn't let external circumstances affect who she is. External circumstances, that's your test. I don't have to take it out on you. I don't have to because I have a headache or I'm having a bad day, I don't have to take it out on anybody else. That's the test of what a person really is. To be good when you feel good, that's easy. To be generous when you have, that's easy. But to be good and to be generous and to be kind and sweet, when you're hurting yourself, that's the test. That's Kulan Shavin Latova. All of her years were years of good. Okay. We'll stop here today. Tomorrow we'll continue with Emir Hashem with buying the Maras HaMachpelah. Something incredible I have to show you tomorrow.